people clearly love life. I love that they don't give a fuck about politeness or rules. So often they'll just be living their lives and it'll cut to the other characters in the scene who are all looking at each other like, wow, they're loud and annoying. And I'm like, Sam, that's you and me when we're old. I just want us to be that happy.
I wrote down that it was you and me in life now.
Oh, this is just how we
walk through the world. Like, I don't even care which one I am. You and I pull up in a carriage. We open the door and 6 dogs jump out.
Yes. Oh my God. Like so many dogs. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Welcome to our house. Hello, Lillian. How are you today?
I am doing so well. As you know, recovering from the trauma of not having internet for 9 hours yesterday.
How did you even live? That's like crazy times.
I was glad that I got back into books recently because I've had not internet before and didn't have anything to do.
Lillian, did it make you feel like a certain Kate Winslet or perhaps a certain Emma Thompson without any internet access, living by the candlelight?
I wake up every day hoping that I feel like Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet. So sometimes you just are given a gift that you have to explain wasn't what you meant by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a palate cleanser episode, everybody, boys and girls and others. And we are talking about Sense and Sensibility, a movie and story that I had never seen before.
I genuinely can't believe it. I'm so excited to hear what you think about this. And I'm going to get to hear it right away because you have to do the recap for a movie you've never seen before until this.
Yes, this is going to be interesting. I'm going to see if I can remember enough of the details well, because I did watch this with Sam. It was one of those situations where I told him, I'm like, I have homework for the podcast. I need to watch this period drama that I've never seen before, Sense and Sensibility. Do you want to watch it with me? And he's like, nah, I probably won't watch it with you. And then he came downstairs like 10 minutes into it. And then he like hovered in the doorway watching for a good 20 minutes. And I was like, just sit down. And he's like, okay. So he sat down with me. And then we like bantered and talked through the whole thing. So
of course you did.
Some minor details may have went by when Sam and I were having very important discussions about a certain topic that will come up later. But I remember the gist of everything. So I'm ready to recap.
Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
You're going to tell everyone Sense and Sensibility in a speed run. Ready?
All right. Boom. We open with the death of a wealthy landowner, and because of the law, all of his money and property is going to go to his son. He also has daughters, but they're getting the short end of the stick because the son's wife convinces him that they should only have $500 a year. So we have a family that has a mom and 2 sisters. One of them is Kate Winslet, and she is the younger sister who's all about love and passion and romance. And then the kind of more sensible older sister, which is Emma Thompson. I don't remember any of their names. So they go off and they find a little house, and the brother of their sister-in-law is a handsome but very shy, awkward man, and Emma Thompson falls in love with him, and they have a little cute romancy thing. And then when they're off at this house, Kate Winslet gets approached by this really cool Alan Rickman guy who is a colonel, and he likes her, but she thinks he's stuffy and boring. And then when she's out on the moors, she gets, I don't know, she falls or something. And then a Rochester-like character shows up, and he's handsome and roguish, and he carries her home. And then she falls in love with that guy and is really rude to Alan Rickman. And a lot of stuff happens. There's a lot of confusion about who's in love with who. Handsome dude is believed to be engaged to this other lady. So Emma Thompson's like, well, there goes my chance at love. Turns out that handsome roguish guy is actually a jerk who leaves Kate Winslet for a lady with money. And then when she's depressed and wandering out in the moors once again, Alan Rickman is like, my time to shine. And he goes and he saves her. So the key to her heart is carry her through the rain. When she falls and gets sick, she almost dies, but then she comes back to life and she's like, I'll marry you. And then it turns out actually the lady that handsome shy guy was engaged to fell in love with his brother. So then he gets to marry Emma Thompson. The end.
Nice.
That's it. That's the story.
I love that there were no names of any of the characters through this whole thing because it is confusing, to be fair. But you did that in 1 minute, 51 seconds. So pretty good for a brand new story.
Yeah, not our longest one yet. So yay me.
But I think you did capture one thing that I feel is very true in Sense and Sensibility, which is there's a lot of characters who are connected to each other in a very confusing way.
Yes.
And the other thing that you got that I think you nailed is, damn, everyone in this movie is famous.
Yes, it's just a huge cast. It's also every time a scene would come up where new characters would be introduced, I was like, "Oh, look, it's Doctor House, and look, there's a Umbridge," and it's just
Yep.
literally if you're an actor in England at the time, probably you're in that movie. So,
It's sort of incredible. So I know I usually talk about the cast at the end. I did ask Piper if I could talk about it up top because I do think we're sometimes going to be referring to cast names instead of character names.
Mhm.
I have all of the character names written down because, unlike Piper, who chatted away with her fiance, I did the reasonable thing and spent the commercial breaks on IMDb. Um, I did also do another thing that I'm going to try really hard not to spend a lot of time talking about, but YouTube found out I was watching this movie via algorithms and stalking me on the internet and suggested that I watch a 40-minute behind the scenes documentary, which I did watch.
So you've got some
So
insider tips.
it mostly just highlighted for me like how incredible the making of this movie was, like just and how at the time in hindsight it's incredible. So for example, Emma Thompson wrote the screenplay for this movie and
Cool.
she actually won the Academy Award for adapted screenplay.
Hmm.
And she is, because of that, the only person who has ever won the Oscar both for writing and acting. She
Oh,
won the Oscar for Best Actress in Howard's End in 1993. So she, as far as Wikipedia knows, is still the only person who has won the Oscar for both of those things, which is very cool.
are you talking about this was just like in the span of her entire career, not like the same
Yes.
year? That's
Yeah.
interesting. I feel like there would have been some other like actor, director, writer person, but cool, go her.
Apparently not. Yeah. No, Emma Thompson's the only one who's done that.
Sweet.
Um, she also won the BAFTA for Best Actress in a Leading Role, and Kate Winslet won the BAFTA for Best Actress in a Supporting Role.
Very nice.
So Eleanor is the name of Emma Thompson's character. She's supposed to be 19 in the movie. Emma Thompson's a bit older than that
She
in
did
the
not look
movie.
19.
Um, and Kate Winslet, this was actually Kate Winslet's second feature film that she was in, which is crazy to think about how incredibly famous she is now relative to the fact that she had been in one movie that had come out a year prior to this.
So this must have been before Titanic.
This was 4 years before Titanic.
Okay.
The character is supposed to be 17. She is 20 years old when she plays this character.
So that's
And
funny
it's
that
Marianne.
it's funny to me that there's supposed to be like a 2 year gap between them because when I was looking at them on screen as sisters,
Mhm.
they both look very youthful at the time this movie is made. But I was thinking to myself, I'm like, the way I pictured them now, Emma Thompson seems way older than Kate Winslet, and I looked it up, and there's like almost 20 years between them. I feel because Emma Thompson was born in like 57, and Kate Winslet was born in 70 something. Unless I'm
I'm now
totally wrong.
officially looking this up. I don't think it's quite that extreme.
But they're not that close in age. They just look both
They're not 2
young.
years apart in age,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, Emma Thompson now is 63 and
Mhm.
Kate Winslet now is 46.
Okay,
So at
yeah.
the
There's like
time,
20 years.
16 years, but yes.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, so at the time, yeah, absolutely. Kate Winslet was a lot older, but I agree. They don't seem
You mean Emma
that far
Thompson, but
apart in
yes.
age.
Yeah.
Yes. All British Emmas are the same person. So yeah, but so that's one of my favorite things about it. Another thing, and then I'm going to do a speed run of the cast. This was Ang Lee's first feature film outside of Asia. So Ang
Yeah.
Lee directed this movie. He's obviously an incredibly famous director. You probably recognize the name. Just three of his like massive hits were Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which came out in 2000,
Best Picture
Brokeback
winner.
Mountain, which was
Mhm.
2005, and Life of Pi, which was 2012.
I love Life of Pi. Sam and I just watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I shared that fun fact with him. I was like, this is an Ang Lee original. And we were both like, man, this movie just needs a little more kung fu.
Yeah. And which I think we're all disappointed about, and if we're
Yeah.
completely honest. And if he'd been given more creative control, maybe he would have been able to do that.
I would love to
Um,
see a martial arts, like English period drama combination. That'd be really cool. Kind of like a Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies sort of a thing, but make it like Pride, Prejudice, and Kung Fu. That would be great.
Ang Lee gets to do it again, but this time it's got a lot of kung fu in it. But they talked a lot about the collaboration between Emma Thompson and Ang Lee in the casting of this movie. She was very involved in the casting, which makes me trust her a lot. And I think, and the way that they sort of collaborated throughout a lot of the process of this was really interesting. There were some moments in the documentary that felt like some of the conversation about Ang Lee, instead of asking him questions, felt not great, but the 90s was a long time ago. And so, but the rest of this cast is also incredible. We talked about Emma Thompson. We talked about Kate Winslet, who played Marianne. Hugh Grant plays Hugh Grant in this movie. His name of the character is Edward Ferris, but the character he's playing is Hugh Grant in the 90s.
I was gonna say, I'm like, this is the exact same character, just a little more shy and awkward than his president character in, or prime minister character in Love Actually. And I'm like, is his whole thing that they just like took a handsome man and they're like, but what if you were cute and awkward? And he's like, oh yes, I didn't realize how handsome I was. And it's like, shut up.
That's Hugh Grant's entire character. Like that's his everything. Because so Four Weddings and a Funeral was right before this. And then shortly after this was Notting Hill, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
I made a joke to Sam because he like we see him at the beginning of the film, then we don't see him for a big chunk in the middle, and then he comes back at the end, and I'm like, oh, he just stepped out to film Notting Hill, and then he came back.
Yeah, yes, he's wearing old-timey clothes, but he plays the same character in all of those movies, and it's Hugh Grant from the 90s.
Yeah.
So he's spectacular in this. Miss Margaret, who's the younger sister, is played by an actress named Marima for Francisco, which is a very French name, and I didn't Google it before I tried to pronounce
and
it.
I even asked you before we started recording, I'm like, have you sounded out all the names, Lillian?
And I think I went, I'm probably going to be fine. They're all British. But she was 12 at the filming of this movie. She has not been an actress in any other movies because she became a writer, academic / journalist, and has done a bunch of like documentaries and stuff where she was a writer and narrator for them.
Cool.
But she like has this incredibly successful academic career and is very cool now.
Neat.
The mother, Mrs. Dashwood, is played by Gemma Jones, and I'm wondering if you've recognized her.
Wasn't she also the mom in North and South, who is like sick when they get to the town? She's not that lady?
No,
okay,
but similar vibe, character you know from this podcast.
Did she ever play Mrs. Fairfax?
She did. She played Mrs. Fairfax in 1997.
Boom.
So 2 years after this, she was Mrs. Fairfax. And she is also one of those actors who like, I don't know if the 90s just really liked typecasting people, but she played a lot of period drama moms in this time. Then John Willoughby is played by a guy named Greg Weiss, who is been in things, but nothing stood out to me. The only thing I wanted to mention there is apparently when he went to the audition, he had wildflowers with him that he hid from them.
Aww.
And then when he's supposed to bring out the wildflowers, he actually brought out wildflowers, and all the people in the room were like, oh my God. And that's why he got the part.
Cute. Just for props.
Alan Rickman was in this movie. I have never been an Alan Rickman girl. Even when I'd watched this previously, I wasn't an Alan Rickman girl. Watching it this time, I'm an Alan Rickman girl.
Yeah. No. Okay. One thing I totally hypothesized when I was watching this, because you grew up with this movie, right?
I watched it. We had the DVD when I was a kid. So when I was watching Pride and Prejudice a million times, I sometimes also watched this.
Okay, because my hypothesis was that if you and I, as kids, had watched this together when we were friends, it would have been a classic thing, just like with the 90s Little Women, where I feel like you would have liked, even though he turned out to be a bad guy, you would have had a crush on the man with the flowers who saved her the first time. And I would have been like, ooh, Alan Rickman's character. And you'd be like, ew, he's an old guy. And so I'm like, but so now we see how cute he is and everything.
Yes, I completely agree. I also was very Kate Winslet pre-heartbreak. Not that you were Kate Winslet post-heartbreak, but you were more Emma Thompson's I don't know, into it. Anyway, we can talk about that. We're going to talk about that. But one thing I wanted to note, Alan Rickman's character is supposed to be 35. Guess how old Alan Rickman was when they filmed this movie?
Oh boy, because he did look kind of old, but maybe it's just in comparison. Is he older than 35 in this? when he filmed it? Yeah. Was he 40?
He was 49.
At that point? Geez, he's old. Is he
I
still
checked the
alive?
math 3 times. No, he died. He
Aw,
famously died. And
famously
his
died.
He famously died, and everyone was really sad about it. I guess you don't consume as much Harry Potter fan content as I do.
I am not a Harry Potter fan, so that is why. I famously love to roast Harry Potter and make fun of how much the universe doesn't make any sense.
I love to roast Harry Potter. That doesn't make me not a Harry Potter fan. Anyway, I'm
I
not a
wouldn't call
J.K.
myself
Rowling
a
fan.
fan. I stopped reading after book 3, and I've seen the movies a lot when I was little, but haven't really watched them since. So
Oh my God. Well, I'm gonna let you have that one because I'm now very upset about my feelings about Harry Potter, but we can't talk about that now.
no, happiness
Um,
only.
but then you mentioned the actor who played Mr. Palmer was played by Hugh Laurie, who was also Dr. House.
Yes.
So ding dang, they done did it. What a
Mhm.
cast. And I
Yes.
genuinely think we'll probably refer to a lot of the cast sort of interchangeably by their character name and their actor name. We'll do our best.
Yeah.
But some of these characters, a lot of these actors had been in a lot of British things, but this was
Mhm.
their first. Because as we know, you're only famous once you're famous in America, which
Doy.
isn't a problematic choice at all.
Yeah, you got to be up in the Hollywood's business.
Mhm.
But yeah.
So, but it truly is like an incredible cast. And the fact that all of these people are not like people who are just famous at the time, but are like still hugely famous now. They've all kind of grown into this super A-list cast with an incredible director. All of this stuff I think is so apparent when you look at the quality of every part of this movie.
Mhm.
But now that I've gone on a 6-hour tangent about the cast, I'm sure you trimmed it down. Um, that I just would love to hear what your thoughts are having watched this for the first time.
Yeah, I thought it was a very nice romance. It felt a lot like Pride and Prejudice to me. There were very similar situations that
Mm,
happened, and I wonder which one she wrote first and how. Because a lot of the stuff I was like, you found your sweet spot and you just kind of did it again, didn't you? It doesn't feel that different broadly from what we have in Pride and Prejudice.
So I
So,
think I think what's really interesting is yes, the stories that Jane Austen tell often fit a lot of these same tropes, but I
mhm,
also think that this is an interesting expression of adaptation because I have looked at the commentary on the way I haven't read Sense and Sensibility, I have read Pride and Prejudice.
mhm.
The choices that were made in the adaptation of these movies is also has a lot of parallels. So
Okay.
this is 10 years prior to my favorite Pride and Prejudice adaptation. It's the same time, literally the same year.
Mhm.
It was actually released in the UK the same time as the BBC 1995 Pride and Prejudice. Like the release was timed with that
Yeah.
so they could boost each other. I see a lot of those parallels. I think a lot of the things that really stuck out to me is like, whoa, that is the same beats that we have in Pride and Prejudice. Some
Mhm.
of those are the story, a lot of those are the adaptation and like the
Okay.
way they choose to space things out.
Yeah.
And they picked a formula that I love, and then they're using that formula again.
Yeah. Because the main thing that felt like it was essentially the exact same thing is girl meets guy, guy likes girl, girl doesn't like guy, hot young other option shows up, she falls for that guy, nice guy decides to leave respectively, bad guy turns out to be bad, nice guy shows up to help, she falls in love with nice guy. Like, I don't know, like that was kind of like it's Mr. Wickham and Darcy, and the same thing
Yeah.
with Alan Rickman and Brooding Rogue. So
Yes, and I completely see those parallels. I think those are absolutely like the archetypes of some of these characters. It's interesting because so many of those archetypes are ones that Jane Austen created
right.
and
Yeah.
other
That's
people use.
totally fair. One thing that was so funny to me, so having not seen this before, a lot of what Sam and I were doing was trying to like guess what the plot was going to do because we're like, we know what's going to happen.
I was
And
dying to know if anything caught you.
so when Alan Rickman shows up, because I'm used to him playing bad guys or skeevy dudes, and
Mhm.
so he come like the first time he like walks up to the house while Kate Winslet is playing piano, and he's like drawn in by the sound of her music, and he kind of just stands in the doorway there watching her. And my thought was, I'm like, is he gonna be a creep? Because I'm used to him being a creep, and he's just kind of
Mhm.
staring at her. But then he turned out to be a nice guy, so that was a cool kind of twist for me as a viewer. I'm like, oh, he's good, yay! So ready for him to creep out and be a bad guy.
Well, and I think I knew him as Professor Snape when I watched this because
Mhm.
while the movies came out in the other order, I watched Harry Potter first and then I watched Sense and Sensibility. So in my first experience watching it, had a similar experience of like, yuck, he's old. He's old and creepy and he's totally Professor Snape. And this time, like, he's got those luscious locks. I need to know
Yeah.
about what your conditioner you're using, sir, because your golden hair is very shiny and I want to run my hands through it.
I loved his kind of like 90s blonde highlights. That was very cute. Again, a situation where it feels like the kind of time period that it's made in is sort of leaking in. Okay, I think first thing, by the way, this makes me think of that we need to discuss. I think this movie wins the award for best bonnets of any
Oh
movie
my
we've
God.
seen.
Yes, yes, yes.
Bonnet
Yes.
Watch was popping off. Like,
It was
oh my God. I think my favorite one is Kate Winslet's bonnet that had the blue fabric in it, that we often see her wearing when they're riding in carriages. I loved that bonnet. That was so good. I freaking loved all the men and their pilgrim hats. I'm like,
yes.
oh, one of them even had a buckle on it. And I was like, holy shit, where's the turkey? Pass the gravy. It's the pilgrims. But I
So
loved
good.
it.
The bonnets were out of control in this because some of them were very sleek, like just the variety of bonnet. Some of them
Mhm.
were very sleek and very like cute, and I liked them. And they're the bonnets that I want to bring back. And some of them were like what I consider fashion bonnets because I have a lot
Mhm.
of opinions about bonnets. At one point, when Emma Thompson is riding her horse with Hugh Grant,
Mhm.
she's wearing this like it's like a top hat, but the brim is really wide and like bent up. We're
Mhm.
definitely putting it on the Instagram. This is going to be a very intense bonnet watch. Usually I try to like cram it all into one picture. It's going to be a multi-picture bonnet watch, guys.
Very
I won't
nice.
do multiple posts, but she's going to be a thick boy.
It is worth it.
The one that I will never stop thinking about, I'll think about every day for the rest of my life, is at one point, Kate Winslet has a bonnet. She wears it multiple times with these huge, like beige feathers
Mhm.
that go across the top. And I
Yeah.
spent the whole movie going, do I hate it or do I love it? Do I hate this bonnet or do I love this bonnet? And I may never know.
Okay. Well, maybe you have to put up a poll about that, Lillian, or just ask in the comments,
I
you
think
guys.
we
When you
will.
see this post, please tell us yes, yay, or nay.
I think
Um,
I think it's worth a poll because we get responses for our polls, so I'm gonna do it. By the way, we didn't say this up top, but thank you guys for helping us pick this movie. It was so much fun watching your guys' votes and hearing your opinions.
Absolutely. So, one of my next notes is about my favorite characters in this whole movie, which I just referred to as Lord and Lady Fezziwig. I don't know their actual name, but the guy who I think is also a dude that I have seen in the early Harry Potter movies. Didn't he play the Minister of Magic for a while? I'm
I
pretty sure
don't
he
know.
did.
You're talking about the cousins, right?
Yeah, the loud people who are essentially
Yes.
the landowners. Yeah,
Yes.
I love them so much, and I just refer to them as the Fezziwigs because Sam and I love A Christmas Carol, and we're like, oh, it's just like Fozziewig and his Christmas party.
So
But these people clearly love life. I love that they
I
don't give
know.
a fuck about politeness or rules. So often they'll just be living their lives, and it'll cut to the other characters in the scene who are all looking at each other like, wow, they're loud and annoying. And I'm like, Sam, that's you and me when we're old. I just
How
want us
dare
to be
you?
that happy.
I wrote down that it was you and me in life now.
Oh,
This is just
cute.
how we walk through the world. I was like, I don't even care which one I am. You and I pull up in a carriage. We open the door and 6 dogs jump out.
Yes. Oh my God. Like so many dogs. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Welcome to our house.
for for anyone who wants to understand the family relations, I have never understood that previously, and I did have to look it up to like follow how they're connected.
Mhm.
So he is the mother's cousin. So Mrs. Dashwood, the mother of the 3 daughters,
Okay.
it's her cousin.
Okay.
He was married to the other woman's daughter who has passed away. So he's the widower, and that's his mother-in-law.
Wait, the woman who was with him is not his wife?
Not his wife, his mother-in-law. They have a
What?
sexless relationship.
I
Or
thought they were
sometimes they
married.
fuck, but that's the behind the scenes.
Oh my God, dude, I totally thought they were husband and wife and just
It's
like jamming their way through life because I was
it's
like, those two rock.
it's been one of the things that has always confused me about this movie is I was like, No, but how are they who's the so what? But they are not married. That is his mother-in-law.
That's so weird, but
And
okay.
so then it's her daughter, her other daughter. So her one daughter married him and then passed away. And
Mhm.
then her other daughter is Hugh Laurie's wife, who's also known as Professor Umbridge, whose name I forgot to look up because I had too many cast members. Um, so Professor Umbridge and Hugh Laurie, who are also just killer characters.
Oh my gosh. I love so Hugh Laurie's character, if you haven't seen this, he's just like a guy who I think just hates his wife and just wants to be left alone to read. And like she's always like kind of chattering away and he's like, "Oh my God, why are you here?" And I think at one point, isn't he like reading his newspaper and she comes by and she just kind of like baps his page and he glares at her. He's like, "Don't touch my newspaper, woman." Like he's
He
so
out
over it.
loud says to her all the time that he's annoyed by her. It's so they're one of my favorite kinds of couples in movies and TV shows where like they she just doesn't she's just like her mother, like this cousin that we're talking about, like wandering around just being like, let's ignore societal norms and just out loud say things that everyone else wants to keep quiet. Let's be the most gossipy people, but forget that gossip is supposed to be whispered and say it super loud in the middle of a crowded room.
Yes.
And so that like that's who these people are. And then the husband is like, I would love to never talk to anyone again. If you could please just leave me alone. And he's constantly telling her to be quiet and to stop and to just be whatever. But then in a crisis, he's super helpful.
Yeah.
Because he's very, very helpful when Marianne is sick, Kate Winslet's character.
Mhm.
And he's so smiley. I don't know if you noticed at the wedding at the very end,
Oh no, I didn't.
so smiley at his wife.
That's cute.
He
Aw.
loves her.
That's nice.
I think neither of them really cares about societal norms at the time.
Mhm.
Like he wants to just tell his wife to be quiet so he can go read, and he wants to be just as blunt as she is,
Yeah.
but
Um,
he just doesn't want to do it the way she's doing it.
so there was a scene towards the end. I think they were doing just kind of a montage of like, oh, here's some stuff that has been happening in people's lives. And Hugh Laurie is seen holding a baby at arm's length as if it's kind of like a toxic bomb. Is that his child? Like,
That's his child.
yeah, okay, yeah. So I figured I'm like, oh, he's like, ew, what is this? The result of sex with my wife. Just like you are definitely not ready to be a dad, but whatever.
Okay, well we've gone deep into Hugh Laurie's character, Mr. Palmer, who
Mhm.
we obviously needed to. We've talked about the two best characters in the movie, which
I do need, so I mentioned to Lillian, maybe I kind of already teased this in this, that I have a
yes,
moment of historical history of
yes, please
research that
tell
Sam
me.
and I conducted. So, because we were speaking of the Fezziwigs, whatever their actual names are, I don't care. But there's a scene when we first see them where they're all hanging out at their estate, and there's this table that is set, and it's got all this nice stuff on it. And in the shot, there are two, count them, two Jello molds sitting on this table that have like fruit and stuff suspended with them. And I saw that and I was like, no, they did not have Jello at that time. And Sam's like, of course they had Jello at that time. And I'm like, pull out my phone. I'm like, I'm going to solve this. And Sam's like, I'm going to prove you wrong. So we went on a historical deep dive. And I have some facts here to share with our listeners about the history of Jello and how
This is
likely it is that those people could actually afford to have it at their table. So, are you ready,
this is
Lillian?
the I before we go into this, this is the reason I potentially was born, definitely did the podcast.
To learn about Jello.
To
So,
have Piper and Sam get in a heated argument about Jello and then come
yes.
on the podcast to solve it, where Sam's not invited to commentate.
Well, he joked about it because originally we were going to record during a weekday and Sam wouldn't be around, but we had to push it back. And then Sam was like, oh, now I can be a guest on your show. And I'm like, no,
No,
I'm just
he's
going
not
to read on
invited.
your behalf. Yeah. Okay, so according to the website, which I believe is like jello.com, like the official
Right.
brand, on their little timeline, first we have 1682, history's first reference to gelatin. A Frenchman named Denis Papin recorded his research experiments on the subject. His experiments resulted in a method of removing the glutinous material from animal bones by boiling. It has no taste, no odor, and when combined with liquid, no color, but it is pure protein. We then jump to 1754. The first English patent for the manufacture of gelatin was granted. Now, 1754, this movie, I looked it up, the timeline, it's supposed to take place between 1792 and 1797. So, about, I can't do math, 40 years ago, Jello was invented. So, this is relatively new. Okay, so then Sam did some research as well. And what he found is this information here on Wikipedia, which says in the 18th century, gelatin from calves' feet was colored blue with violet juice, yellow with saffron, and red with, I think it's pronounced cochineal, and green with spinach, and allowed to set in layers in small, narrow glasses. It was flavored with sugar, lemon juice, and mixed spices. The preparation was called jelly. English cookery writer Hannah Glass was the first to record the use of jelly in trifle in her book, The Art of Cookery, which was first published in 1747. He then found a page from this cookbook, which we looked up. You can't buy it. It's like $4,000 for a historical copy. It's called The Art of Cookery, Made Plain and Easy. And I don't know if you can see this on my phone, probably not, but the underneath it says, buy a larder. And there's the recipe for gelatin, which is mixed in with the desserts. So Sam said, therefore, it could have been served as a dessert. But the best part of this find is the very last recipe, Lillian, in this book is a certain cure for the bite of a mad dog. So you can learn to make jello and a cure in case you're bit by a rabid animal. So here's my conclusion. These people are pretty wealthy. This dessert has been around for 40 years. So they might have actually had it. But did it look like that? Hell no. That is a modern jello mold. I stake my life on it. I just killed Lillian with my awesome history facts. So I think, Lillian, in addition to your extensive bonnet watch, I also want you to put up a poll on Instagram that says, did the Fezziwigs actually have jello that looks like that or no? I want the listeners to decide. You are so dead. Oh my God.
I keep trying to tell you that it's just the funniest thing. I'm so happy right now.
Yay. See, this, I was saying to Sam, I was like, Lillian keeps bumming me out with very important historical information. So I'm going to get her back by doing a deep dive into Jello. So at least mine makes you happy. So you need to do your next history thing. Better be something that's positive.
Oh my God. That's amazing. Well, if history could be more positive, I would.
Yeah, it's history's fault.
God. It really, really is. Oh, that was so perfect in every way. I did also do a little bit of research for this podcast. And it brings us back to the beginning because we've been doing a bit of a jump around. So right at the beginning of the story, you mentioned this in your recap. The father is dying because I thought I'd bomb us out right away.
Lillian, you're going to talk about fucking how women can't own property and how much that sucks? Because we know that, Lillian. It's common knowledge.
No, I promise I'm not. I just wanted to understand the math of this situation. So I do always find it a little bit funny in these shows when they're like, these poor women, they're going to be poor now. It's like, you're going to live in a pretty 17-room cottage with 2 servants.
I'm glad you said that because I was thinking the exact same thing. I was like, boo-hoo, a 2-story house with a big garden. So sad.
and there's some layers of difficulty to the situation where it does make them finding husbands hard because they are sort of straddling this line of society where it's like they're too poor to be good matches for someone, but they're also too high status to marry someone that's a step down. Yeah. So they're in a complicated situation, but that's all we're going to talk about with that. And we're going to live in the reality of this is a tough situation for these ladies. So he starts by saying that the most the father is able to give them in his will is $500 a year, which compared to what they've been living on is almost nothing. So I didn't want to do this math for every single one of the numbers that they bring up, but he asked his son on his deathbed, help your sisters. I can't, you need to do this. And the son goes, of course I will. But he's a whiny little bitch boy. So his wife, Fanny, who's the worst,
Ugh, I hate her.
is he starts by telling Fanny, I'm going to give them £3,000 and then they can have the interest off of that. Because when they say income, whenever they talk about income and Pride and Prejudice and other things, it's actually based off of either the interest or the rent that
Mhm.
they would get from property and things that they haven't owned. So they have some level of capital and they live off of the income from that.
Mhm.
So the £3,000 that he wanted to give them is the equivalent of $327,000 today. And I'm sorry I didn't do it to pounds. I did it to dollars because that's what Piper and I know.
Aha.
So that's a really decent amount of money. You would get a pretty decent interest off of that money to be
Yeah.
able to live on. That would be a really great supplement to this relatively small income that they got. She then knocks it down to 100. He offers 100 a year. She then suggests 20 pounds. He then suggests 20 pounds every now and then, which is hilarious. And then eventually she goes, honestly, I think he probably just meant that he wants you to like care about them, and you do. And giving them money might make their life harder. And
Oh
it's
my
like,
God.
Fanny, what a bitch.
Just shut up and get out.
I hate you.
And she is the sister to our sweet, shy, handsome boy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's weird that she turned out evil and he turned out so sweet.
Yeah, because everyone else in their life is supposed to be sort of garbage. Like we never meet his mother, but she's supposed to be garbage. And he supposedly sort of went off and got educated somewhere else,
Mm.
and then sort of had this very complex life situation,
Mhm.
fell in love with Lucy Steele, who we'll talk about. I hate her. Um, but so that's kind of where we start, where then we meet, we go to the house. She's just terrible. And we watch these women get kicked out of their home immediately after their father or husband dies,
Yeah.
which is sad.
No, there's that moment that I did appreciate when the mean sister is like kind of complaining about it. She's like, oh, they're not even talking to me. Like they're so rude. And the nice shy boy is like, their dad literally just passed away. Like maybe cut them some slack. And she's like, whatever. But yeah.
You showed up at their house like a
Mhm.
week after their dad died, and
Yeah.
you are kicking them out of here.
Yeah.
She literally tries to kick the 12-year-old out of her bedroom.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Not cool. Not cool. I want to talk a little bit about how actually awful and weird Kate Winslet's crush is. So he does have a romantic moment. Their meet cute is quite good.
You're
I
talking
didn't.
about Willoughby, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Who I will refer to as just Rochester, just because of the way that they meet.
So interesting to me that you think he's Rochester.
Well,
Because I
see,
was going
that's
to ask about that. We'll talk
That's
about
the
that.
thing. I
Let's talk
literally
about
have.
Willoughby.
Okay, let's talk about Willoughby real quick because I literally have a note here in all caps, and I was like, the Colonel is actually the Rochester, in a good way, in a complicated way. Anyway, so the notes that Sam and we were just like kind of roasting this dude because apart from his good meet cute, where he arrives on horseback in the rain like a Rochester, she's fallen. He does ask consent before he touches her to check out her foot. And it's like, is this dude a doctor? Does he have any kind of medical training? Or is he just like fumbling around pretending he knows what he's talking about? I don't know. Whatever. But when she's getting all swoony over him and like talking about sonnets and stuff, which famously she teased her sister's boyfriend about because he's too shy to read passionately. So
Or Hugh Grant, she bullies him into reading,
yes.
and then she criticizes his lack of passion for reading.
So when Kate Winslet is healing and like jerk boyfriend is there. I'm sorry for listeners. It's going to be so confusing the way I keep referring to different people.
You do that and I'll sneak in the real names. So
Willoughby, okay.
She falls, Willoughby picks her up.
Yes. He has this moment when they're talking about poetry and stuff, and he's like, I just happen to carry this book of poems on my person. And Sam and I were like, oh my God, this is the dude who shows up at a party and he's like, oh, I just happen to have my guitar with me. And like Kate Winslet's like, oh my God, he's a musician and stuff, where everyone else is like, gross, dude. Like, what are you doing?
That's so Emma Thompson in an interview, she goes, Willoughby is the guy who broke your heart when you were a teenager. Like, it doesn't matter how he broke your heart. He was your high school crush and he didn't like you, or you dated and he broke your heart. But he's a guy that every girl knows
Yep.
that you liked and it did not work out. And it was the moment of you going, maybe the things I like are bad.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I
I
think that's what Willoughby is, because I completely agree. It's very, I brought my guitar to a party.
yes.
And if you're 16, if you're 17, that's hot.
That's hot. You're like, "Oh my god, like he plays music? That's so cool. Maybe he'll write a song about me."
I love it. Like if you go back and listen to some of the like acoustic moody boy music I
Oh yeah.
listened to when I was a teen,
Mhm.
like oh my God, what's the name of his name's like Owl something.
Oh, Owl City.
Owl City. That was I was like very like I was like, this is so deep. And I've listened to it now. I was like, it's music. Like you did a song, sir.
His voice with 1,000 fireflies. Like, that's the song that I remember.
That's the one that I would listen to all the time. And I would be like, this is what romance is. This is love. Love is 1,000 fireflies. And I don't even know if that's the right number. It doesn't matter, you guys. Like, it's the guy who wrote you a sonnet, and you're like, oh my God, I love, like, this man has Shakespeare. Like,
Mhm.
it's fine. It's very basic of you, sir. And that's
Yeah.
fine. But don't act like he's special because he likes Shakespeare.
It's like, "Oh, yeah, I like music." You're like, "What kind of music, though?"
I play
Um,
guitar, and it's like it turns out he knows how to play just like one riff from one song, and he plays
oh,
it anytime he has a chance.
he just does Smoke on the Water again and again and again. One thing I thought was freaking hilarious. So, first move, creepy when he like cuts off a lock of her hair and like takes that, but hilarious that he sends it back, which I think he like just mentions that in his note. And then later when we find out his gross scandalous like past or whatever, I'm like, ew, I'm glad he sent it back because I don't want him to have my hair when I know that he's so weird and sketchy. And then Sam and I were joking, we're like, what if it's not actually her hair? What if he like paid someone for a lock of hair to send back and he still has it in his weird collection? And we're like, this dude is totally a you guy from the show on Netflix. He's got a box full of hair. So creepy. Get out. Go
Oh
ahead.
my God. It's just so, so wonderful. And I think her whole vibe is very like late teenager. And the
Mhm.
fact that she sent him a lock of hair, like, because that's part of the confusion of the story. Like, so part of the drama of the story is the moment when Willoughby like leaves. So they all think he's going to propose.
Mhm.
And we find out later he did actually have plans to propose. So he is a fuck boy, but he's not that bad.
Mhm.
But he gets disinherited because he impregnated someone else.
Which he impregnated the adoptive daughter of her other love interest,
Yes.
right? Which
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so now she is married. So now her husband has a ward who is pregnant with the child of the man that she was previously in love with. That is so fucked up.
So I think ward in this sense is used a little bit more loosely. So
Okay.
again, this is another thing where like the plot in this, they sneak a lot of confusing, complex things into this story that I did not follow the first time that I watched this movie. So
Mhm.
basically, if you just watch it, the gist of it is Alan Rickman's great, fuckboy's bad. Like
Mhm.
that's the whole
Yeah.
show. But the details of what actually happened is Colonel Brandon, who's Alan Rickman,
Mhm.
was in love with his father's ward when he was growing up. So his
What?
father's ward,
I thought
when
it
he
was
was growing up, they grew up in the same house. She came and lived there when he was a teenager. They fall in love with each other. When his father finds out, he kicked her out of the house. And when she got kicked out, he got sent off to the army. When he
Mhm.
came back, he found out that sort of out of desperation, she had been having affairs with these different men, very Celine from a Jane Eyre sort
Mhm.
of life, where she's getting sponsored by these men and that's how she's living.
Mhm.
She is pregnant when he comes back. She has the baby and dies and asks him to promise to care for the child.
Oh, I missed
He
that completely.
places the child with a family in the country where she can, so nobody knows about his connection to this girl. They don't even know she exists.
Uh-huh.
So he places her with a family in the country that wants a daughter, and he goes and checks on her, and she thinks of him kind of as like an uncle person who's like
Okay.
he will financially support her if he needs it. Like he's her outside supporter who's looking in on her, but is not like a parent to her.
Okay.
She runs away and they
Mhm.
can't find her.
Mhm.
When they find her, she is pregnant and the father is Willoughby.
Do you have any idea how old this girl is? Because
The
when they said that, I was like, wait, how old is she? Like, ugh.
the age of it is not clear in the movie. We could probably look it up and find out what it's supposed to be in the book,
Okay.
but
Still
it's
sketch.
probably gross. So
Yeah,
Willoughby
probably
still
gross.
sucks.
Yeah, he really sucks. Bleh. Do you want to talk about that girl that you said that you hate who
Oh,
believes that
Lucy.
she's engaged to our handsome shy boy?
Oh, Lucy, Lucy, Lucy.
Mm.
I just, I wish I had sympathy for Lucy. I want to not hate her. I don't know that what she's done is hateable, but she's so she's so annoying. Okay, so who Lucy Steele is. So Edward Ferris, who I called Edward Fairfax multiple times in my notes.
It's part of our brains now.
This is why we do palate cleansers.
Mhm.
But Edward Ferris, who like is played by Hugh Grant, when he went off to school, we find this out kind of throughout the story. We get little bits and pieces of this. When he went off to school, he met this woman named Lucy Steele. He fell in love with her, very teen romance.
Mhm.
He promised to marry her. They got engaged, but they didn't tell anyone. That was
Mhm.
5 years ago.
Mhm.
He's grown up a lot since then. When he was flirting with our Emma Thompson, he like thought it was only his heart on the line. Um, and so we meet Lucy Steele when she comes with the Palmers, who's Hugh Laurie, to visit the area where these sisters are now living. She is like, Emma Thompson, we should be best friends. I have a friend who really likes you and talks about how cool you are all the time. And she's like, I don't know who that would possibly be. And she's like, it's Edward. And she's like, Edward? And she goes, yeah. I have to tell you a secret and you can't tell anybody, which she says multiple times to multiple characters. And
Yes.
she confesses that she's been engaged to him the whole time and swears her to secrecy. And because Emma Thompson would never go gossiping around this to anyone, she tells
Mhm.
literally no one.
Mhm.
And this woman traps her into listening to her talk about how much she loves the man Emma Thompson is also in love with
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. No, it's a tricky situation. I wouldn't say that makes me hate this girl. And I see what you're saying about her being annoying, but I don't know. I just again, there were so many things about this very complicated social network within this story that things kept kind of being like I was like, "Oh wait, hang on a second." Cuz like when they went to that big party and
Mhm.
then the Lucy or annoying girl that you were talking
Mhm.
about she seems all flirty with the other brother with the big teeth. And I was like, oh, it's just a case of mistaken identity. Like she is actually in love with that guy, and Emma Thompson thought it was the one that she's in love with. But then no, the truth is the truth. But then later there's a big switcheroo, and she's like, oh, actually I went with the guy with the weird teeth. So now you're single and ready to mingle and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, this is so complicated, but okay.
So here's why I hate Lucy. I don't
Mhm.
think any of the things that I share, like she doesn't know that Emma Thompson is in love with him. Although there's an argument to be made that she does know, and that's why she's doing this to
Right,
her.
to kind of be like, hey, back off. Hee hee, we're best friends. Yeah.
But I choose to read it as that's not what's happening. But what she does do is when they go to that party, she gossips to everyone about Marianne. So
Mhm.
she, unlike these people that we've talked about that we really like, who are
Mhm.
like kooky, but whatever, like they're gossips, but in like this way that's they like just don't have a great understanding or respect for social norms,
Yeah.
which is fine. The way that they gossip is a lot more like the way that Blanche and characters like her gossip,
Yeah.
where they are intentionally speaking down
Mhm.
to people who have less social status than them as a way to try to build themselves up. So
Yeah.
the gossip she brings to the sister-in-law, Fanny, is the reason Fanny likes her
Mhm.
because she's talking shit about Fanny's stepsister-in-laws and is just being cruel to them intentionally. And that's how she gets into this social circle.
Mhm.
So that's what I don't like about her. And then I think there is supposed to be a bit of she's flirting, she's trying to get in good with Edward's family so that she
Mhm.
can marry him, but
Gotcha.
she doesn't confess her love for the other brother until after Edward is disinherited
Mhm.
and the younger brother is the one who's going to get the money.
Gotcha.
So I I think I don't know that we get enough of her in this movie for me to hate her the level that I do,
Yeah.
but I think that she's not a good person.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I I can't remember. Isn't it? Am I remembering this context right? There's that scene where Lucy is hanging out with the bitch sister, and she's like, "I have this secret," and the girl's like, "You can tell
Yep.
me. It's fine." And she's like, "I'm engaged to this guy," and then she like full on attacks her and like physically
Yes.
like drags her across the floor, and I was like, "Damn, girl!" I loved that moment. That was
It's the
great.
best. So Lucy, that's the other thing is like Lucy's like, you can't tell anyone. I haven't told anybody, which is the same line she feeds Eleanor, who's Emma
Yeah.
Thompson.
Hmm.
And so I get the impression that she's been spreading this secret around because it secures her position more. And also she's gossipy and she has this secret that is so valuable. And so she like gets in good with the sister and then she goes, I'm engaged to someone. It's a secret. And she goes, is he a good guy? And she's like, yes, but his family won't approve. And she goes, anyone who meets you would approve of you, which is like, just these people suck.
Yeah.
Um, and then she's like, okay, well, let me tell you. And she whispers in her ear and she literally pulls her out by her nose. She like
Yes.
puts her knuckles around this girl's nose and they do this like little slap fight thing at one point. She physically throws her out of the house. It's
Oh, it's
so
so
funny.
great. So funny. Oh my gosh. Okay. Some of my final thoughts and notes have to do with kind of the end of the story. Are you cool if we jump to that point?
I want to talk a bit more about Colonel Brandon and I want to talk about Colonel Brandon and Willoughby and how they're so Alan Rickman
Hmm.
and who's Rochester.
Hmm.
Because I think that they both have very Rochester-esque moments. They both have Rochester-esque characteristics. And
Hmm.
I honestly think there are two ways to it. Like there's so many similarities between them and Rochester. And I
Yeah.
will say, we are talking about the adaptation at this point. That is actually one of the things they talk a lot about in some of the articles that I've read, because I'm a crazy person, is that the way they fleshed that Emma Thompson fleshed out the male characters
Hmm.
is part of the biggest difference in the adaptions. So
Okay.
there's a lot of added scenes. There's a lot of like all these other things, which is a criticism of Jane Eyre's stories is that they don't often, the male characters are very two-dimensional, which I think is true. So it wouldn't surprise me if the period dramas that she's drawing from are very Jane Eyre-esque.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
but I think these two characters and how you can read them, I think they're two different versions of Rochester.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that a little bit.
I'm sure we're on the same page. I think Willoughby is all the initially like mysterious and alluring and yet also toxic and bad traits in Rochester, and I think Alan Rickman is all of the trying to care for someone misunderstood traits that we like in Rochester. That's kind of how I
Mhm.
see it.
And that desire to take care of someone versus the desire to manipulate and exploit someone. I
Yes.
think there's a moment that is very like the kindest possible reading of Rochester, which we've seen this sometimes,
Hmm.
is the moment that Alan Rickman is talking to Eleanor, Emma Thompson, and says, I'm going to share something with you, and I'm only sharing this because I think it's helpful information. I'm not trying to talk shit about Willoughby. And I'm like, you
Hmm.
should talk shit about Willoughby. And he tells the story about, he like gives all the details that we talked about with his ward and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and him sharing it in that way of like, I'm not trying to like tell secrets about someone or share information that you shouldn't have. I just think this would probably make her feel better.
Hmm.
And I think the moment where Marianne realizes the difference between these two men and like why her affections were like easy to persuade in the wrong way is that moment when she goes back out after her illness with Emma Thompson and they look down at the house, or they're on a walk and they look at the spot where she fell.
Hmm.
She said, right there is where I met Willoughby. And she says this thing that I found so interesting and just such a great moment of character development of I I don't know